Now let's get to some story stocks, maybe something you might want to watch. Mish Schneider's with us, Chief Strategist at marketgauge.com. Thank you for being here, Mish. Happy New Year. How are you feeling about 2024?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if everyone expected to see the explosion in semiconductors and growth stocks to start the year like we've seen, particularly after the first week, which we saw everything go down. But here we are. And so what it's telling me is that there's still a separation between what's happening in growth and everywhere else. And everywhere else is really what I think is a more accurate measure, maybe, of what we can expect economically and from the Fed. And I think the simplest thing to say is just look at the retail space, which is not really keeping up right now with what's happening, say, in semiconductors.
And so with that, when you see what's going on, how will you gauge about where to put some money to work? What are some of the criteria you're using for this year?
Well, one thing is the January calendar range, which is always an exciting time because it kind of resets the stage for the first 6 months into the whole year. Particularly this year, it's even more exciting, of course, because we're in an election year. And so essentially what's happening right now is we're looking for things that had their price range the first couple of weeks of the month, what's breaking out above those highs, what's stuck in the middle, and what's breaking down. And so the things that are already breaking out, those would be obviously mostly in the growth stocks and the semiconductors, and there's a couple of commodities too, which is really interesting. But the stuff that I'm really keeping my eye on in terms of next opportunity are kind of stuck in the middle. And that would be a lot of the consumer stocks that you and I talked about actually last time, which I'm calling the vanity trade. I'm interested in that. And I'm also really interested to see what happens here with inflation because I still have not given up on the idea that it can come back and haunt the market and the Fed as we get further into this year for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, I want to hear more. Let's break it down. You already started doing that for us. Vanity trade, tell me about that. That's more in the consumer realm. And those are some names that you do like. Like what and why?
Well, what's so interesting is that last year, obviously, we saw this very strong consumer at the end of the year. The consumer confidence numbers came out last week. The consumers are in it, right? There's a lot of disposable income, no matter how many stressful stories you hear about credit card debt, et cetera. And so I started to think, well, what were they going to spend money on this year? And it kind of got into my mind with Ozempic and the diet drugs that people are going to change the focus from traveling and going out to eat more to self-improvement. People want to feel good about themselves. Last year was you only live once. This year is, okay, maybe it's time for me. So as a result, you have categories: skincare, fashion, diet drugs, cosmetics would be another, and that can trickle into other areas. It might trickle into dating, it might trickle into exercise and exercise equipment. So this is really my focus. Now, most of those stocks, not all of them, are kind of stuck in that range I was saying. So it gives me a really good eye to look at things like Coty, AbbVie would be one because they make injectables. TJ Maxx, which has had a great run, but is sitting right under those highs that we're talking about. Urban is going crazy. IPAR, which is a perfumery, also doing well, but they're not quite at that explosive stage yet. So that's just a few of the areas and stocks that I'm really keen on.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. To your point, I mean, people focusing on themselves a little more than originally thought, I guess. Tell me about another group. I know you were watching cannabis too. Tech is always on my mind. Are you part of the AI craze at all?
Well, luckily for us, we have quant models that are really trend strength indicator models, all done through algorithmic formulas that have caught most of this move. And actually this week's taken a lot of profits, which tells me if I were looking at it from a discretionary standpoint, I may not necessarily want to jump in now. But I'm really watching Microsoft very carefully, and mostly because of this launch of Copilot. I think that could be one of those revolutionary apps that changes a lot of things, particularly for people who are working, but in every area. And I'm just learning about it now, but Microsoft has had a huge run with everything else. It's kind of stopped at around 400. I'd like to see what happens with the stock, but that might be where I would go. And that's an AI area that hasn't been talked about as much.
All right. And so tell me about commodities and cannabis.
Okay. Well, I guess you could say cannabis is kind of a commodity, right?
Yeah,
Well, a couple of things. Obviously there's a lot of talk now with the election about declassifying cannabis, and I know that there is obviously a very popular thought about that in the country. So it's be interesting to see if that becomes a political hotbed. Right now it seems like it's being pushed more towards that. But I mentioned AbbVie before. So in terms of cannabis, I'm really interested in how much Big Pharma adopts it for its use with medical research and drugs, and what kind of lobbying pressure that might put. So we've been in MSOS. I mean, we take profits. We're pretty active in that area. That hasn't quite hit the trend strength indicator like we've seen in some of those more growth stocks. But nonetheless, AbbVie, let's go back to that for a second, is doing very well. And they're actually using cannabis as part of their medical research. So I thought that was kind of cool. Commodities, since you asked about that, are really interesting to me right now because even though gold and silver have kind of flatlined, particularly gold, oil is starting to pick up a little bit. It just got over $75 a barrel, which means geopolitics haven't exactly gone away. But soft commodities took a big rally in the last week. And if you just look at DBA, which is kind of a nice basket of lots of softs, grains, live cattle, those kinds of things, it gapped higher last week and is actually higher still. So that is, I think, the sticking point is in the super cycle of commodities where people think disinflation and it's all over, soft landing, mission accomplished. Anything can happen to change that, in which case we have a whole new market as we go into the second and third quarters.
Back to the consumer, I mean, you had NVO for your diet drugs. That was another one that we may have left out. What about Peloton, Match, Bumble? Are those things you like? And they've been beaten down.
Yeah, I love that you asked me about those, Nicole, because I am a little bit of a contrarian, right? So, but I like to call it an space contrarian, right? So yeah, dating definitely fell out of favor. I mean, starting with COVID, but even since, people are necessarily actively dating as they used to back in the day, and I think that's kind of sad. But nonetheless, Match and Bumble, two dating apps I've been watching very carefully, and they have been beaten up. So it's another one of those areas. Like, let's look at Bumble, for example. It's been trading between like 13.5 and 14.5. The momentum actually is doing better than the price. So what would trigger that? To me, from a technical standpoint, again, it would be, all right, the winter's over. Obviously there's been a lot of illness around. Let's go out. I feel better. I've got my, my slimmer body, and I've been, working on myself. Let's date. And so Bumble gets to 14.50, and we start to see more of something like that. Then I think that could be an interesting play because it has such a huge short float. So that's why I'm looking there. Peloton had some big news a couple of weeks ago. It flew and came right back down. So I'm just watching to see right now whether those things find a good base. So I'm not saying run in right now, but I think when things are out of favor like that, and if we get more stressed out, people can start turning into wanting to actually reconnect with others outside of their homes and their computers.
Yeah, Mish, it's great to see you. And I think the consumer story was a lot of fun. And you had names like Allergan, part of AbbVie. You said Botox, Juvederm, Cool Sculpting. I mean, I have a lot of friends doing a lot of stuff, and it really is interesting where people are putting their money. Used to be save your money or buy some stocks, but everybody's going crazy. Mish Snyder, marketgauge.com. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you, Mish. Happy New Year.